but I'm really excited to be here because I get to moderate, I get to help some amazing leaders tell their stories and inspire all of us. So as you heard, I am the president and CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and we are committed to lifting and supporting local leaders in our communities because we believe, as we've been hearing throughout the forum, that without the leadership of local leaders, without the leadership of the people who are closest to the problems, how are we going to actually create solutions that work? So as a philanthropic institution with many, many, many members, or many donors, that's what we encourage. Is instead of sitting in our rooms and thinking about, oh, well, this solution should work or that solution should work, how about, hey, Dakota, what do you think is going to work in Wisconsin? Okay. And then I should be able to say, okay, here's what go, do, change the world, right? I know it's a little radical in the field of philanthropy. I've been in it for a very long time, in and out of that and education, that we've heard over and over in the last few years, particularly since COVID, that without that kind of model, without that kind of humility that philanthropists and those of us who have the immense privilege of sitting in a leadership role in philanthropy, without enabling the work, without using our resources to enable the work that needs to get done, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels in our local communities, in our countries, in our world. So the people you're going to hear from today are incredible leaders who are, wait. The first one calls it counterintuitive leaders. We're going to hear from somebody who was in jail with Nelson Mandela and worked alongside with him. We're going to hear from two co-leaders. They're co-CEOs, which I still have to get my brain around, but I cannot wait for everybody to hear your story. And then we're going to hear from two leaders who are a generation and another generation behind me. And as a Gen X-er, the millennial got out of the way for the Gen Z-er, who's just barely older than my own son. But it's a youth-led organization. So why not let the youth lead? How much longer are you going to be a youth, though? So that's what we have in store today. And I'm going to get to it so that we can hear from each of them. What we're going to do, I'm going to bring each up so that we're going to build to the full panel so that we get just enriched by each story. So first, Ambassador, please join me. I am going to read a little bit about you. Not too much, no, because I only have a few minutes. So sit here. Yes, you get to be close because then they're going to fill it up. So this is Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool. Ambassador Rasool is the former South African ambassador to the United States and former governor of Western Cape. He served as a member of parliament in South Africa's National Assembly and special advisor to the state president, and has had extensive experience in public service in various departments such as health, welfare, finance, and economic development in the capacity of provincial minister. He has a long history of involvement in the anti-apartheid struggle, including leadership in the United Democratic Front and the African National Congress. He is the founder of the World for All Foundation, which aims to rethink the intellectual tools available to Muslims and faith communities and create cooperative relations between faiths, cultures, and communities at a global level. The World for All Foundation is especially active among Muslim minority communities, transferring examples of coexistence from South Africa, and increasingly acts as a conduit for Nelson Mandela's lesson to the Muslim heartlands in the need of freedom, democracy, and human rights. With that, please welcome Ambassador Rasool. Absolutely. Okay, you have worked with two of the world's most iconic leaders, Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. I don't think anybody in here would compare us to those leaders. But many of us use them as our North Star. I know I do. And a North Star for our work in whether it's local communities or at the state level or country level, or even a global level. What kind of lessons can we learn from their leadership?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Nicole, and thank you very much to Skoll and the audience that's here. You know, Bertolt Brecht, in his play Galileo, uses a memorable phrase where he says, "Unhappy is the land that needs a hero."
Unhappy or happy?
Unhappy.
Unhappy.
Because heroism, the need to rise to the occasion, often occurs when a country or a society is deeply unhappy. The Scandinavians can win literature prizes and science prizes and so forth, but they are so happy that they don't win Nobel Peace Prizes. I've had the privilege of working with 3 of the 4 Nobel Peace Prize winners in South Africa: Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and F.W. de Klerk.
Forgot about that, yes.
And all of them put together a texture of leadership that spoke to the deep unhappiness of apartheid South Africa. And therefore, when you are in an unhappy situation, it is not a call for despair. It is a call for heroism. It is a call to rise to the occasion. And so we should be so privileged that when confronted with deep unhappiness, like Nelson Mandela was, you joyfully go to prison for 27 years. When you are faced with the unhappiness that Desmond Tutu was faced with, you place yourself between an angry mob and a white policeman and save his life because your values say this is what's worthwhile. And when you are faced with the deep unhappiness that F.W. de Klerk was faced with, you go out to persuade a white community to relinquish power. And so it's not the populism
Right.
that we see parading around the world, the mainstream extremism, as I call it. But what you see is popular politics, in which you take unpopular position and you persuade communities about its rightness and then get them to act in concert with it. And that's the privilege that I've had to work with all 3, those kind of leaders in a project, and that ultimately triumphed, and to understand what made each one of them so successful in becoming the hero that we require in the world today. Our challenges are different. Today, our enemies don't walk around in uniform. They are insidious. Our enemies don't drive Caspers and armored vehicles armed with guns. They aim at our minds with fake news and seductive siren songs. Our enemies don't, for example, jail us, but they poison our mind with a toxicity of fear and anger that make us rally behind them. And therefore, I think that the enduring lessons, while each one of those 3 heroes that I worked with were time-bound,
Right.
their lessons are eternal in time, universal in space, and adaptable to circumstance. And that really is, don't look to imitate Nelson Mandela, look to emulate him. And emulation is the act of finding that finest values that they worked with and that you can transpose in different circumstances. That's what we're dealing with. And so, for example, just one last thing, they were all governed by one bit of African philosophy called Ubuntu. I am because you are. It is the recognition of the humanity in the other that either impels you to protect your own humanity and the humanity of your people, but also makes you conscious that you take the humanity of your enemy in your own hand, because you've got to salvage that humanity for them as well, if the future is going to be one of cooperation, coexistence, and working together. And that is out of which was born the process of reconciliation
Right.
in South Africa, and the process of building a new country and a new society founded on the most enduring values that we could have.
Thank you. Thank you. There are two other things I want to talk to us about. The instinctive way of leading and the counter instinctive way of leading. And you touched on some of it in what you've just said. Can you lift those up? You know, you talked about populism versus popular, right? And how's that played into your own leadership style?
You know, another African saying that we have is one that says, your anger is hot, but it cannot cook. You see, so much of what activism is premised on, and to borrow from Al Gore, that sends us down rabbit holes, is the belief that anger is legitimate. In South Africa, the struggle is to direct your anger, to give it a purpose and to make it cook. And if you have the anger that you speak with this righteousness, that you label with abandon, that you condemn even your enemies to death, it's all an expression of real problems that you're having, real grievances that we're having, but it does not cook. It does not take you from the devastation where you are to the promise where you want to be. And so the counter-instinctive is how to manage your anger. And that's why Nelson Mandela could come out of prison. And he was asked, are you not bitter? Are you not angry at the people who jailed you for 27 years? And he replied that if I were to be angry, I would carry them around and they would continue to imprison me forever. Anger is an imprisonment. And that's counter-instinctive, to overcome your anger and to move forward in the same way that popular is counter-instinctive to populist. It is better to speak into the anger of people and direct that anger at whoever you want to direct it at. And then lastly, that counter-instinctive is that we learn from Mozambique, Angola, Rhodesia, all of those colonial states around us, that their colonialists had somewhere else to go. The Portuguese to Portugal, the Brits to etc., etc. Our colonialists had nowhere else to go.
They had to stay.
They were going to stay. We had to face them the day after liberation. How do you want to face them? With perpetual anger or with coexistence? And if you choose coexistence, you choose reconciliation. And if you choose reconciliation, you make the rules that will make reconciliation sustainable and equitable into the future.
This is incredible. How do you practice that each and every day? When, I can't imagine being in prison for 27 years and coming out joyful and willing to not just work with, but coexist with my captors. And, in a world where we're just bombarded with the images and the stories of things that are done to people of color, minority in terms of size, communities, and poor communities, and the oppression that we see, we get bombarded by it. It is overwhelming. So how do you practice that every day? Like, please help me. How do you practice that every day?
By always pushing to the front of your mind what often wants to go to the back of your mind, and that is your purpose. It is about purposeful leadership. And that is why your purposeful leadership says, and Nelson Mandela said this, and I see the end sign there. Nelson Mandela says, in 1964, he's facing a death penalty in court. And he stands up, and his lawyers advise him not to make the speech. And he stands up and he says, I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society where every human being lives with dignity. It is, he says to the judge, an ideal for which I am prepared to live and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. And he challenges the judge, put me to death. And that makes the judge say, I won't make a martyr out of you, and sends him to jail for life. But what Nelson Mandela does is not the song of the fundamentalist or the extremist who wants to die for the cause because they don't know how to live for the cause. Nelson Mandela says, this is the cause for which I want to live. I want to achieve it. But it is so worthwhile that if necessary, I will die for it. Sometimes each one of us has to find that purpose that is so worthwhile to die for, that we now know what to live for. And that is purposeful leadership, keeping the big picture all the time in your head, a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic and free society. That's what I want. And then to live for it and never live in contradiction of it, because moral ends don't justify immoral means. You can't want to be non-racial and mobilize race. You can't want a peaceful society and spawn wanton violence. You can't want to have inclusivity but demonize the other, even your enemy. You've always got to redeem souls on earth. And that is the way in which Nelson Mandela acted his leadership every day and was purposeful in his leadership.
To live the purpose. First one. Let's thank the ambassador. It's time to bring up two other leaders. Thank you.
That should be in.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Need to take a breath after that. Right? Live for the purpose. So please join me in welcoming our next two panelists, Edith Elliott and Shahed Alam, the co-founders and co-CEOs of Noora Health, who were 2022 Skoll awardees. We saw them on stage last night. And Noora Health is an international nonprofit that improves patient outcomes and strengthens health systems through the power of family caregiving. So first we have Edith, whose work is rooted in the belief that the best solutions in global health are often the simplest and the most overlooked. She believes that everyone and everywhere deserves the agency and human dignity associated with access to high-quality health care, and that no one should suffer from a preventable condition. Having been a caregiver herself, unexpectedly at a young age, she understands the universal feelings of confusion, anxiety, and distress that come with the work, and strives to infuse that level of empathy across Noora's programs. Prior to co-founding Noora, Edith was a design innovation fellow and entrepreneur instructor at Stanford University, where she focused on the intersection of research, program implementation, and design thinking in global health. And she was previously worked at the Aspen Institute and Population Services International to support efforts around infectious disease prevention. So welcome, Edith. And her partner in purpose, Shahed Alam, is the son of immigrants to the U.S., as was I, and saw firsthand the barriers of his family and other immigrants and communities of color and what we faced trying to navigate the health system. He saw the struggles and triumphs of his own mother, who cared for his grandmother through a devastating neurological condition. And it wasn't until medical school that he began to understand the power of informal caregivers, people like his mother who tirelessly worked to care for the people they love because there's nowhere else to turn. From his first conversation with patients and families in the U.S. and in India, he observed the powerful role families could play as a core part of the healthcare delivery system. These experiences shaped Noora's core values to lead with empathy and always begin by listening. And prior to Noora, Shahed focused on research and advocacy to improve healthcare for incarcerated populations in the United States. And he worked on developing low-cost technologies for better diagnostics in low and middle income settings. So please welcome Edith Scott. Okay, so you have to follow that. It's going to be fantastic. So traditional leadership models have a CEO at the top of the organization, and I'm in that traditional leadership model, although I don't often look like a traditional leader in philanthropy. That's a whole other conversation. But you created a co-leadership model. So please walk us through that. How and why? Who wants to start? Edith, you want to start?
The why is that it's a lot of fun. So I wanted to start with that. And how was an evolution. So when Shahed and I met, we were strangers. We did not plan to start an organization.
When did you meet?
We met in 2011, end of 2011. And we were in grad school. Shahed was getting his medical degree. I was getting a master's in policy. And we were in a class together where we were learning about something called design thinking. And we both had come into this course and into the work with very open minds and had no intentions of sitting here today together, certainly. And part of this course, you're introduced to, in our case, it was a doctor in India, and you work on a project together. And in some cases, that project evolves into an organization or a company, and in many cases, most cases, it does not. And we assumed we would be part of this. It would not. He was going to go on to practice medicine. I had plans. I thought I'd go over on the philanthropy side after being on the nonprofit side. And a really brilliant part of this course was yes, of course, learning about design thinking, but also focused on how to make teams work, how to get to know one another so that you can do what is very often difficult work together. And we almost spent more time and had more interest in the interpersonal, not just get to know you, but really like deep, get to understand your values, get to understand your purpose, what leads you to your work, whatever your work might be, and really building that relationship. As much focus on that as we did on what now has become Noora Health, because again, we didn't think we were starting an organization. And I think that, you know, when we talk about our partnership, it's the one fundamental that has to exist in this co-leadership is a deep level of trust.
Yes.
And if that trust is eroded at any point, things will break down.
Yes.
And that trust includes transparency. That trust includes a deep love and friendship for one another. We are not romantically involved, which is a question I get quite often. He does not.
Yes.
This baby was someone else's. Yes. Whole other conversation.
No, it's true. Well, women leaders get asked that all leaders do not get asked.
No, it's actually quite remarkable. It's in my top 5 questions I know I'll get asked within the first few minutes of a conversation that I've been prepared to ask. And we didn't discover that he has never been asked that until one time recently.
Yeah.
We didn't discover that until very recently, about a year ago. So that to me, we really focused on the get to know one another piece and have prioritized that throughout. Yeah, what you want to add?
Good.
I'll quickly add.
Yeah.
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Ibrahim. I'm still processing
Yes, right? Right?
what you said, so it's incredible. And maybe the only thing I'll add is the reason why we ended up, I guess, choosing this model is it just made sense for the type of collaboration that we had. We, again, trust was the center of it. But this is hard work. It's big work. We have such lofty ambitions to do what we want to do to improve caregiving worldwide, and there's just so much to do, and we need a complementary skill set, and we need this partnership to make it work. And I can't see any other way for it to work between the two of us.
So how do you divide the work? So for those out there who may have colleagues that are like, oh, we get along great, we have similar values, how do you divide the work? I mean, is it by skill set? Is it by interest? How does, like, practically, how do you make it work?
So I think the fundamental is that both of us feel accountability of the whole thing. And I think that is a really important core value to us, that, you know, while we may focus on different things, our day-to-day does look different. We manage different people, different parts of the organization, but at the end of the day, we both are answerable to the part that the other person is focusing on. And so
they can't play like one against the other.
Exactly. So shared accountability is critical, and I think forms a really, really important part of it. But otherwise, it just split up kind of logically. It's, skill set,
So what areas do you oversee?
So on the external facing side, I work more with our government partners, research partners, maybe some of the other stakeholders within, mostly government and health system stakeholders. Internally, focus more on programs and research, and you can share.
Yeah, and I'll focus more on internally the admin, finance, that side of the operations, and then externally fundraising, external relations, communications, that piece. Yeah. And that's evolved over time as well. But just piggybacking on what Shahed said, it's mutual accountability is absolutely key. And if we rarely have a disagreement, I think, because I trust his core values so deeply. I trust his instinct, and I trust his, if he takes a call on something, it's usually because he knows more about that area of the work than I do, and vice versa. And and that would be a conversation that we would have. But if I come to know about something that is new, it's yes, of course, that's the decision. And right, we always put on that united
front.
Yeah, because it is united. It's yeah.
So it sounds like it's worked swimmingly. What are the challenges? There's got to be some challenges in there. No?
we were
Maybe I'm creating a challenge.
No, we knew you would ask that, and we were trying to think back to like, we've never really had a big disagreement, and I think it's because again, it gets back to that the core purpose and values, and I don't want to make it out to be like all sunshine and butterflies and everything is perfect. That's not the case. We have to make difficult decisions, but again, it goes back to me stepping back and saying, okay, I trust you on this because you are the domain expert in it, or you've had those conversations or whatever it might be. And I trust your instinct, and I trust your core value when it really comes down to the work. And we really were racking our brains for an example of one of these. And we've had difficult times and moments in the organization's history, and times when we've disagreed on, say, whether or not someone should stay or leave.
Right. I was going to say this.
It's
it's the hardest part of leading.
Absolutely. Or a decision around whether or not someone should join or not join the organization. And in those cases, again, it's, you're going to be working with that person more successfully, or you're the one working with them. So if you want to keep them, then great. But my gut is X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And just being really transparent with one another about all of it.
And supporting, even if we don't agree, supporting
the decision.
Not the I told you so, but like, okay, this is what Noora is doing now.
Yeah. Okay.
Together, we've decided, and this is what's next.
Yeah. So would you recommend this model for people who may not have met each other in grad school, right? And had, the length of time that you've been you nurtured a friendship and a professional relationship before you started your organization. So that can be a pretty rare situation. Would you recommend it to those who don't maybe have that personal history with a co-founder, for example?
I'll just add one caveat. I mean, our personal relationship, I guess, has been formed through our experience professionally. So, and I met a lot of people in grad school. I don't think I would have co-led an organization. Yeah. So I think it did come down to the fit. It came down to, again, just the values of the day-to-day of how I work and how she works, and how we found over time that that actually does align really well. And so would I recommend it? Absolutely. Of course, it matters who it's with. Like, it's not like, I wouldn't say you could just choose this as the org structure and then maybe go out and looking for two people. But within an organization, if co-leadership is available and a possibility, that I think it can happen beautifully, and doesn't have to look exactly the way that Edith and I do it, but it's absolutely viable. I would recommend it. And again, for us, like, I couldn't imagine this in another way, and I think it makes us more efficient, more effective, more resilient. Actually, I think that's the most important part.
Right.
Absolutely. And I would recommend it as well, but I would say, if you're going to do it, because we see so many organizations and companies fall apart when leadership falls apart. If you are going to go down that path, you have to work really hard at establishing the relationship that you have with your partner, both within the work and outside of the work, and creating that link of trust. Because again, without that, nothing else exists and matters. Yeah.
Right. So, final question, and you can choose. One thing you want the audience to walk away with, or one thing you learned from what the ambassador said? You can choose. Whichever question you'd like to answer.
I mean, again, I'm still processing, but I think it's maybe related to what I would leave it with is just purpose, and shared purpose is so important. And oftentimes you do forget that, because whether you're angry at what's happening in front of you or anything else that comes in, but at the end of the day, the reason that this works is because of that shared purpose, shared vision, shared dream, and the long-term view on that. It's not the decisions that we take about hiring, firing, whatever, the strategic decisions in the next few months or year are actually immaterial to really the bigger vision and the bigger picture and the purpose. And I I would say, yeah, that's what binds us, and hopefully that's what binds all of us. Yeah.
Perfect way to end.
Perfect way to end. The co-leadership model right here. Thank you, bro. Okay. Now for our last set of panelists, please welcome Sarah Audelo and Dakota Hall. Perfect. So Sarah is currently the Deputy and Advocacy Director for States at Open Society Foundations. She has spent her career advocating alongside and supporting organizers from across the United States to build power on the local, state, and federal level. As the Deputy Advocacy Director, that is a mouthful, Deputy Advocacy Director for States, I want to make sure I get it correct, at Open Society Foundations, Sarah supports groups building and flexing electoral power, as well as fighting for the issues that matter most in communities across the country. Prior to this role, she was the Executive Director of the Alliance for Youth Action, which is what brings us to this conversation, which is the largest youth grassroots organizing network in the United States. And before joining the Alliance, she worked in policy and advocacy at Generation Progress and Advocates for Youth in the U.S. on issues such as healthcare, economic justice, higher education, and LGBTQ rights. And Dakota Hall, hailing from Wisconsin, United States, is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Youth Action and Alliance for Youth Organizing. And this alliance works with young people to engage in our democracy as voters, organizers, and leaders. In 2017, Dakota founded an organization named Leaders Igniting Transformation, or LIT, to help Black and Brown youth in Milwaukee, Wisconsin achieve social, racial, and economic justice. Under Dakota's leadership, LIT successfully advocated to remove the Milwaukee Police Department from the Milwaukee Public Schools and ended the use of metal detectors on campus and suspensions for children in elementary school. And that was 17 years old. Bravo. Bravo. Okay, I'm going to start with Sarah, because Sarah was the leader of the organization, the Alliance for Youth Action, and decided to step aside and make way for the next generation, for the youth leader himself. So why did you make that decision? Why was it important to you?
Yeah, so when I became the executive director of the Alliance, which best job I've ever had, pretty great. Entering a youth organization, there's a clock. There is a clock about how long you actually are considered a young person. How long is this an appropriate role to have? Too often, especially youth organizations, there's folks who are, a generation or two removed from target populations.
Are you?
I am not on TikTok, which is the other part of it. And so it was time to go. But entering the org, there was always a plan to leave. And while that was important as running a youth organization, I actually think that's important in any organization. Because at the end of the day, a question of how great the work is how it, in my opinion, sustains after you're gone. And so because too often it becomes about you, the leader, the person, right? And, especially as EDs, we get to come to fancy conferences and speak on panels and try to keep everything holding down back at the org. And it's a lot, but frequently it becomes about you. And so, I just being in the work, supporting other EDs, which is a big part of what the Alliance does, it just became increasingly clear, like, one, I wasn't young anymore, but two, I was just ready for a new generation of leadership. And Dakota's way cooler and the Lord does like way more awesome work. And I'm very glad that I left for those reasons. And also, like, we got to do other things in our life too.
Yeah. So was there anything challenging in making that decision for yourself?
I mean, like, it's a great organization. It's great work. I miss the people. I miss the energy. I miss, like, I joined the organization because I was working on a presidential campaign and we couldn't do a lot of awesome work with young people. And I kept looking at the work of the Alliance being like, that's it. That's what we should be doing. That's what we should be supporting. Because youth organizing, it's fun and sometimes it's weird and sometimes it's like shocking for folks. And like young leaders are both like the future and the present, and to be surrounded by that energy all the time for even the hard parts, I miss that like crazy. That was stepping away from the people, I think, was the hardest part. But also I was on a journey to parenthood. So I was like, I need to stay on.
Yes. So how did you make the transition? And then I'll get to Dakota, but how did you make the transition?
I had an incredible transition committee of board members, of staff, of executive directors from our network that I was not on. And a couple things to name that I feel were really important. Maybe Dakota will disagree. But I was not part of hiring the new ED. I thought that was really important. It wasn't going to be my organization anymore. I was not a stakeholder. Everyone else was. And so folks could ask me questions and I could, here's my thoughts, but it was ultimately up to others. So that was, I think, a really important part. I am not on the board. I think it's important for EDs to not be on boards when they leave, because oftentimes board members will lean on prior leadership.
So what do you think?
Yeah, right.
Even though he's sitting at
He's there and he's like, he's got all the answers, and so it's just getting out of the way. And actually that's something my predecessor did, which I really appreciated, especially because he was a white guy from Montana, who just also is very big in this space. And he bounced so that I had space to lead. And I've been trying to do that with Dakota as well, because he already led incredible work in Wisconsin. And it's been a privilege to see him just like thrive and continue and take the Alliance to the next level while I'm kind of over here.
Right. So Dakota, was Lit part of the Youth Alliance?
Yeah.
And so what was that like? Did you put your name forward? Did they come to you?
Oh man.
Position? What was that like?
So I think I kind of vividly remember like one day Sarah like slacks me and said, "Hey, you have 15 minutes?" And like I was like, "Sure." I'm not really doing much today. And I joined this like Slack call. And Sarah's like, "So this job, are you interested?" And I remember being like, "Absolutely not, Sarah. Like, not at this moment." And I think I lied to Sarah. I was like, "Actually, these other EDs in the network are like more interested. Like, go talk to them." Just to like, yeah, completely made it up. Just like the rabbit chase, like, don't come back to me. I'm happy in Wisconsin. And then at some point, like, I think Sarah and I just kept talking. It was like probably like 5 months, maybe 6 to get me to apply. It was a while.
It was a while.
It was too long.
Yeah, it was really too long. And then one day I'm in DC, Sarah and I are having some drinks. And she's like, "Yeah, I'm mad at you for not applying." And I was like, "Well, Sarah," I pulled out my laptop. And in that moment, I applied for the job.
On the spot.
On the spot. I think they were in like the third or final round of interviews as well, too. And like on the spot, I'm just like, "Here's my application." Completely threw off the process, and had to go through, I think from late September until sometime like mid-October, had to go through 4 or 5 rounds of interviews to catch up to where everyone else did the process. Found out I got the job early November, and then started later that month.
Wow.
Chaos. But I also caused that chaos. So it was like, okay.
Yeah, because you waited
Yes.
all that
Yes.
time.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Good thing. You have to wait for good things.
Or somebody to maybe nudge.
I think Sarah did some nudging, some good nudging. I think like it also just like took, like, because I founded the organization in Wisconsin, when I was like 22, 23, like just like probably like think of like your most annoying like young employee. Like that was me trying to like run an organization. pushing every boundary and button in the world, and like figured it out finally. Right? And at like that point, I was like 4 years in. I felt very comfortable where I was at in terms of like running a statewide organization. Like I knew everything. I knew basically like how I was going to start the year, how I was going to end the year. There was no surprises at that moment. It was just like, I have the playbook. I'm going to go out and be successful. And the change there, right? Like that's changed to like leave that comfort, to leave potentially my home state at that moment as well too. And moving to like from Milwaukee to DC and being like, DC's like gross. It's hot. Like I'm from Wisconsin, like I like 7 inches of snow on the ground, right? Like in DC is not that environment.
Like 2 inches in DC.
Yeah, this is not the same.
Not the
right?
same.
Like, everyone's like very like political in DC, whereas like in, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, like you don't have that vibe of like politics every single day, right? And so it did take some nudging, and also just like me being comfortable in leadership enough to like grow out of that and be like, okay, I can go be uncomfortable and grow in that uncomfortable.
Yeah. So how many staff did you inherit when you took over Dakota?
15 or 15.
20?
Really?
21?
We grew a lot. It was a lot.
It was like 2021, I think.
Okay. How did they react?
I mean, they already knew me, right? Because I was in the network, right? I was in the network from like 2017 until I got the job in 2021. So they kind of already like knew who I was. They were like, all right, like we have a guy that like we're semi-familiar with. We seen his work in Wisconsin. They were very receptive of that. And like the Alliance is like so unique, is like because they're so hands-on support. Right. I guess now we are, let me talk present tense. With our affiliates, like I would say like there were only maybe 2 staff members that I did not interact with like on a deeper level prior to starting the job. Okay.
So talk about the interplay for those who work with young people in their work with youth. That refrain of like, oh, but how do we get the adults and the youth to work better together for this youth organization? Did you have any of that? Were people, or did you face, you're handing it over to somebody younger? Does he have the experience? Did you get people asking you those annoying questions?
I mean, I think I got that mostly with like funders. Like we're not familiar like with the work, right? Like I think the Alliance staff were like, oh, like Dakota knows what he's doing for the most part. Like,
right. They saw your work.
They're like, he caused a little chaos. Like he'll push some buttons, but like for overall, I think like there's always like in a transition, this like wait and see phase with the new executive director if they're going to be successful. Which like I found very weird because I thought I was very successful in Wisconsin. Like we kicked out Scott Walker, we made sure Donald Trump didn't get reelected. Like we were actually pretty successful in Wisconsin. So I was just like, what is this whole wait and see for leadership? Like how this like thing is going to go? That I think just like really kind of confused me. I was just like, I don't know, I was 28. I was 28 and I got the job. I was just like, who are these older adults that like don't trust young people to lead after so many successful years?
I think that was also surprising for me as well, was that, Dakota led this incredible work and, like a lot of national funders, partners didn't know anything about it. And I think one, because it's a youth organization, right? Youth orgs are always having to try to push through, improve themselves and, be taken seriously. And 2, folks get lazy. They just want to pay attention to what's happening on the national level. They only are looking at like the big orgs when, the work of Dakota and others in Wisconsin, the U.S. would look very different, if not for some of the successes that, had been building for years in the state. And so that, I think I was very surprised about how many introductions needed to happen. I'm like, y'all not lit? What's wrong with you? How do you not know this organization?
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Same question that I asked prior to. Yeah, it's actually 2 questions. One thing that you can take from the ambassadors, but the ambassador said, or one thing you want to leave the audience. You had time to think about it.
The ambassador talked about in terms of like anger in your head, right? Like this is what my generation says is like they got real estate in your head, right? Like they're living rent free inside of your head. Sorry if no one's ever heard that before, but that's just the way I process that information. Is like, when you're angry, right, and you just like literally are allowing people to like live in your head, like these are demons in your head that like these are the thoughts that keep you up at night. I think that's like really impactful, right? I think that's like a multi-generational thing that every young leader, every leader has experienced, is like you have these doubters, you have this anger towards society when you see it, right? Like you see a society that's unjust, that allows like young kids to die in school shootings, and like what does that mean, right? And how do you actually not let that anger consume you, but actually come out into building a world of joy, and like just knowing that it's not just young people who are angry. Like this is the battle that I think every leader has to go through, is learning how to channel that anger into something that is more purposeful, that actually can build.
Well, fantastic.
And I guess for me, so I'm from a really conservative part of California, and Bakersfield, yes. And you know, what I took away from it, I keep coming back to the word grace for others, and I think about that a lot in the relationship to my hometown, because there's a lot of really hard parts of my hometown, and it was a wonderful place to grow up. But there's a lot of good humans there that I think have been, you know, pushed and pulled by dis and misinformation, and just like rallying around like kind of just don't know what to do with their own anger in many ways. And so I keep coming back to grace and what you talked about, especially as it relates to reconciliation, because I think about, for the United States, the amount of work that needs to be done to reconcile. My hometown is a key place where there's a lot of work to be done there. And so I'm still reflecting as well and processing, but that is one of the things I certainly took away.
Great. So let's thank these two. And before we transition to Q&A with the audience, do you have any questions for each other? Now that you've heard, you know, how you're leading and how each other's leading, any questions that you had from what you've heard from each other?
Ambassador, I'm curious about how you've been in the work for so long. Like, what keeps you here? Because I feel like I get tired frequently, and I'm like ready for a break. And but yeah, what keeps you in it? How do you keep, you know, the fight going? Because, yeah.
No, you know, there's a saying that the pleasure is in the anticipation. It's not always in the achievement. That to anticipate your holiday keeps you going through the year.
Just true.
To anticipate victory keeps you chipping away and not slagging. And more importantly, to stay in touch with your own humanity replenishes you. Because some people thrive in being workaholics. There's no merit in workaholism. It's like any other addiction. It diminishes you. And so you've got to plan for joy in your life. You've got to plan for your regeneration. And, you know, I brought my children up with a Denzel Washington quote from a film, The Debaters, in which he takes these young kids from the projects and turns them into the champion debating team. And he says to them, in life, you first do what you must do so that later you can do what you want to do. And I'm in that later. I now do what I want to do. It's been the prospect, the anticipation of my life that I will reach a stage where I don't have to go to jail and I won't have to be under banning orders and house arrested, that I don't have to do this. Then I went through the phase that I don't have to be deployed into government and be a minister and be an ambassador. I will soon do my own thing. And I'm now in that third act, in which I now do what I want to do at my own pace, my own time. And that's what, if you phase your life in the same way that you must see the purpose of your work, you must also begin to phase your life so that you can pace yourself and not, because in government you learn how dispensable you are. Tomorrow everyone can vote for you and make you the governor and love you. The moment you leave the office, you know that they were only in love with your title. And you should never have enslaved yourself to the title that you now don't know how to get into a car without opening the door yourself. And that's a lesson that I learned very early in life. It's to retain who I am. So I'm just saying that that's really the way in which you don't. The wonder about Archbishop Tutu is that he taught us never to take ourselves too seriously. We are busy with serious stuff.
Yes.
But you are a cog in a bigger picture. Yes. Don't take yourself so seriously that you believe this organization will fall if I'm not there. The organization will go on. And you will be disappointed that it goes on without you. Really, I'm just saying that that's really how I understand all the lessons of life. And so I'm just throwing it at you.
It's my dad good. It's good. Glad you asked that question. Any other questions of each other? Shahed, no? No, it's good. Okay. So now we're going to open it up to all of you. Yes. And please do say your name and right behind you. Yes. And where you're from.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you so much. This was incredible, and I really appreciated it. I'm Alice, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of a startup incubator that's based in Iraq and Colombia. I think one of the main things that I took away from this is you guys are all incredible leaders working on really, really challenging topics. And I think, Ambassador, thank you. You gave a great overview of how to take care of yourself as a leader, but you're also all leaders, which means you're running teams. So when you are focusing on these really hard issues, how do you maintain that passion and take care of the people working for you as well, working with you?
Oh, thanks. Edith.
So our team has grown very quickly over the last couple of years. We went from, first a scrappy team of 4 co-founders. There were 4 of us originally, to 10, 50, and now we're 400 plus and hiring every day. And one thing that we've always prioritized is we'll have a few resumes and have met a couple of people, and if again our values aren't aligned, we do a lot of interviewing around values alignment and value fit and team fit, and that takes priority over skill fit or past experience. And anytime we haven't done that, it's acted to the detriment of the work and the team, the broader team. And anytime we have prioritized that, then it's definitely been to the work's benefit and to our team's benefit. And we also do put a lot of focus on and have invested in from an early stage, even when we didn't have the resources at times to invest in this way in team wellness and the same exercises, these exercises that we learned when we were first getting to know one another, we would do with our team, even when it was uncomfortable, and trying to build that trust certainly with the early team. It's getting harder and harder. We can't interview everyone anymore, but trying to, what we've tried to do is teach the next line of leadership how to hire and bring people into the ecosystem in the way that felt in line with what our values are.
And maybe the one thing I'll add is having that value of that wellness is of course important and communicating about it, but unless you lead it yourself and take that time and show that you actually value it and it's not just something you're saying, I think that makes the biggest difference. And now for us, it's not just Edith and I, it's the whole leadership that needs to do that. That means taking time off. That means when you're sick, not joining Zoom calls and saying that, coughing in the background, taking that time and truly embodying taking care of yourself. And of course, in our work, we're about caregiving and making sure you're making room for that, whatever that may mean to you.
It's having policies that support that. Even if you're hearing in the ecosystem, that'll never work.
Yeah.
Unlimited holiday policy, that's not, no, it's not going to work unless we take vacation and model that.
Right.
And
true.
Take a fair amount of vacation, not just
a long weekend.
Tiny long weekend. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Other thing I'd add that I've been trying to be good at as a manager, and it can be, maybe it's a little awkward sometimes, is just remembering that the staff that we work with don't need to be at our organizations forever.
Right.
And something I've done in a couple of places is to have frank conversations of I know you're not going to be here forever. When you're ready to leave, let's have a conversation about it. Because I want to make sure where you go is a good place. Because I've had experiences in the past where people who are brilliant end up in terrible places.
Right.
And it's worked pretty well so far. I will say, when I announced my transition, I had 2 just the most incredible deputies, these badass women who like within a month of each other, we're like, so there's this opportunity I'm looking at. And I was references for both of them, and they're like killing it and amazing and incredible. And wow, that timing sucked. And stuff. But just to say, like, you know, the work that everyone who's here does is clearly important and transformative and impactful. And we as humans are more than where we work. And so, yeah, just to name where people go after is also a reflection of us as leaders.
Yeah. Yes, amazing.
It's the balance between making everyone who works for you. And I managed a 90,000 health establishment in the Western Cape, making everyone feel absolutely valuable, but at the same time, not making them think that the organization exists for them. We exist for the broader impact in society. If you don't keep that balance, you can have a club rather than an organization. We are so busy helping each other that we are wellness for ourselves and not for society.
Right. Really important, really important. It's here and then there and then back. So right here. Yes, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this really amazing, I don't know if it's a conversation, it feels like an exchange. Yeah, I mean, we're taking it all in. My name is Noora Ismail, and after 17 years of doing really wonderful work in international development space, humanitarian space, I've earned a year to be off. So I'm an Aspen ICAP fellow, and not like off, but you know, like off the way we all do it.
Yes.
So, and I'm also, I'm getting some, I'm taking the time to learn, and I'm taking a class with Marshall Gantz at the Harvard Kennedy School on political organizing and leadership. I have so many things to say, but other than just my gratitude, and I hope the answer to my question, Nicole, you may also partake. I'm sure as leaders and new leaders who we so want to be the norm, people ask you for advice, but I would rather learn from you and ask you, what questions are you asking yourself right now where you are? Thank you.
Wow. I always ask what's next. What's next in the work? I always, because it's the work our foundation is currently doing is work that we've been preparing to do. So my work today is building off of, could be years of work. So I'm always like, where should we be heading? What should we be learning from what we're doing today and what we've learned in the past? And where should we be heading? Where does our community need us now? Where will they need us? So that's something, it's constant in my mind. Anyone? Shahed, did you leaned forward?
Well, first, thank you for that question. I suppose to me, this is all a learning journey. I always think about what more do I need to be for the work that we're doing, and just keep questioning myself that every day.
Just very quick from my side, you would all know that I've spoken about the great history of South Africa, but we have a very bad present. And the question that I ask myself is, what do people like myself do to salvage the legacy of noble people against the venality of those who trade off the organization and the legacy of Nelson Mandela to do dastardly things to society? And so my question is, how much energy do I have for that fight? And every day that I don't do something, I feel unworthy. But I also know that it is not a fight that I can do if we don't mobilize the bigger society, but it's the resources beyond myself. So can I embrace my limitations?
Wow. If you feel unworthy, it's actually a little reassuring. A little reassuring. Yes. We can go to another question do you have an answer?
gonna come down a few. I'm embracing my limitations. I think I'm the question that popped into my mind immediately. So I'm having a baby in August. It'll be my second, and right now I'm asking myself, how is this going to work? And under the current structure of my life, it wouldn't work. So I think as new parents, both whomever you are bringing a child or new life into the world, and we see this with our team, with people on our team every day, and trying to create policies and structures that support them, but really starting with myself and asking, how is this going to work, and make space for the work to be at the forefront, and not my experience to be at the forefront, because it's not about me.
I think the question for me is like, I know there will be a next, and oftentimes, I'll sit in a room, I may be the youngest or like one of the youngest people, but like eventually, like I'm gonna start getting gray hair, right? And like thinking about like, I've been successful so far in avoiding that, but like, who is next, right? What is that next generation, and how do we prepare them for some of these larger fights, and how do we make sure that they don't have to go through the same problems that we're going through today, and how do we stop this like cyclical cycle of like voter disenfranchisement, misinformation? Like, how do we set up like our grandkids for a better life where they don't have to fight every single day?
Bad. It's holding that's the killer.
I got Kristen right through all of us that were older than him when I was together. But I'll say I had a baby, my first this past August, and trying to figure out how to parent and do the work, especially for parents who are executive directors. I don't know how you did it. I could have done it while I was in ED. But shout out to Skoll for my partner being able to come with my baby so I could be here, because otherwise, if he wasn't here, I wouldn't be here. And then I think the other thing, I'm new to philanthropy, and I'm trying to think about how do I be the funder I wanted. I had a couple instances of that with some great folks, but how do I be a great funder and support leaders in ways that me and other peers really hope to have?
Fantastic. Thank you. There was one, yes, down in the front.
Thank you. My name is Reina Montoya. I am the founder and CEO at Aliento, and we work with the immigrant community to transform trauma into hope and action. My question is, what is a leadership moment that really challenged your heart? And can you walk us through that?
You might want to go before the ambassador. It's on this side. Lesson learned. Just saying. We'll start on this side. Ambassador, you have to wait till your turn. Yeah, see it? I tried, y'all. I tried. Go ahead, please.
No, I must say that any struggle is an adventure until the crunch comes. And we all need to face our crunches. I mean, they've said that I'm very active in the Muslim community, and in all Abrahamic faiths, every prophet had to have a moment of severe testing. Moses could not do what he did until he battled his own temper. Jonah could not do what he did until he learned patience in the belly of the whale. And so we can go on with each one of the prophets, and Joseph in prison, etc. There's got to be a moment that you need to face your demons, combat your demons, and discipline your soul for struggle. Otherwise, it's ego.
Yes.
And how do you get the ego out of the room and really face this battle-hardened soul now of yours that is purposeful and sincere and filled with integrity of good purpose? And so when you're out in the streets battling the police throwing rocks against their bullets, tasting tear gas and whoops and all of it. It could be fairly adventurous. You've got tales to tell everybody. But there's a moment at which struggle is sacrifice rather than adventure. And you've got to reach that moment when you are making the trade-off about how much time you spend with your own children and how do you balance the needs of your own child with the needs of other people's children who are not fortunate enough. But you can't do for other people's children what you don't do for your own child, because otherwise you are just instrumentalized. So for me, that moment really came with my second imprisonment. And I spent about 4 months in solitary confinement. And I was sitting with a whole lot of secrets. And I needed to stare down my interrogators. But you can't have the steeliness of your soul if you are frivolous in not working on your soul. And it's that moment that you need to muster all the resources. And I'm sure you don't all have to go to prison in order to find that moment. I think you just need to have very reflective personalities. You need to carve out quiet times. You need not to brush aside criticisms of your leadership by saying, no, everyone else thinks I'm great. And you ignore the one voice that may be the truth teller. Pay attention to that voice. And make that the moment that you will stare into your own soul. It may be a minority voice, but it may be the only honest one.
Right.
And we so often justify ourselves. Our answers come before the question is even finished, to justify ourselves. And so you don't have to go to prison. You've just got to be a very aware person. Your antenna have to be not thin-skinned, but your antenna have to be attuned to the quiet people in the audience as well. The ones who don't clap when you speak, who don't call you sir and madam and CEO all the time. You've got to give people the space to be critical. You've got to create the safe spaces in your leadership where people can say, and we call it a consequence-free discussion. And that really happened to me in that first 4 months under interrogation, having to keep the secrets. And of course, you then go to the resources of your culture, your faith, or whatever the case may be. And for me, it was, I only had the Quran. And so I turned it into a program. I read it in Arabic after the morning prayers. I read it in English until lunchtime, just to keep sane. And we've all got to find our ways to keep sane. I memorized the Arabic in the afternoon, and I did that interpretation in the evening. And that's how I steeled myself for the interrogations. Because you take the almost, and we've got to all find our equivalents, you almost take the invincibility of the author of the Quran to imbue yourself with invincibility. You've almost got to renew your purpose and to see that these are things that happened before and things that will happen afterwards. You are one part of the relay race of life.
Right. Right.
And so forth. So really, I think that's the moment. But I'm trying to extrapolate so that you can all find your own moments without having to go to it, because it is extrapolatable to your own situations. It's just that sometimes we are so busy that we aren't reflective. Sometimes we don't build quiet time into it. Sometimes we don't listen to nagging voices. Sometimes we don't invite criticism of what we are busy with. And sometimes we don't have spiritual touchstones that allows us those, and sometimes it's cultural touchstones, sometimes it's spiritual touchstones, sometimes it's faith touchstones, and there's a difference between faith and spiritual. Yeah. And we've all got to find our touchstones that earth us in honesty. That you may need to, as a politician, often hide truth, but you can't hide it from yourself.
I told you to go before. We have time for one more question. Oh, sorry. There was one in the back, maybe two, depending on if it's, yes. Maybe we don't mind if we go a couple minutes over.
Thank you. I'm also overwhelmed by this discussion. Thank you so much. My name is Matthew. I'm from CBM Global Disability Inclusion. We're an organisation working with the disability movement in many countries. And often we see in leadership that people with disabilities and other marginalised groups get to lead their own organisations. They're kind of niche organisations, but really hard to break into non-specialist organisations. So I'd love to hear some of your strategies or tips or experiences on how to really encourage and develop next generation of leaders from really, really marginalised communities, that not only the disability community, but LGBT, others. Would just love to hear any thoughts. Thank you.
I mean, when I made a offhand comment that most leaders in philanthropy don't look like me. They don't come from a single mother who immigrated from Jamaica with a 6th grade education to the United States, who lived as the help for a wealthy family, and I grew up in that household. And I'm sitting here. And there was a lot between my childhood and here. And I am now invited into rooms that I didn't know existed. And I'd been in philanthropy and other, for quite a bit. I'm grateful for the people who opened the doors and let me in. Most of them were white men who believed in me, because that's the field that was philanthropy for so long. When I go into those rooms, I don't go in as Nicole Taylor. I go in with the thousands that I know I need to be busting the walls open for. So that is the way that I deal in a sector that is highly privileged and highly I don't even have a word for it, but I think you know what I mean. And I beat a drum on it in every room that I'm in. And I have to look back. I have to bring others with me. I have to mentor. I have to. People are like, you're on email. You're constant. And I feel the responsibility to talk to others who are coming up, particularly young women of color, because I know. So that for me, that I'm trying to open doors everywhere I go, because it's the only way that this field will change, is that I'm not one of the only ones in the room. So others.
So when I became executive director of the Alliance, there were very few people of color running national political civic engagement organizations. Very, very few, like could count them on my hand. And then all of a sudden, a couple started popping up here and there. And I was talking to one of my friends who was one of those leaders at an org, and I'm like, we just got to get together. We just have to have a happy hour or drinks or something. And I kept saying it, and she's like, Sarah, will you just organize it? And so I did. And then it has now grown, and like others stepped up to hold the space in different ways. And now we have this dope network of EDs of color who have each other's backs, because it's certainly about like, who are we bringing along to get in these roles? Who are we nudging to say, hey, you should apply for this role at an organization? And then it's about making sure folks are able to lead in those roles, that a lot of organizations that certainly folks of color have taken over, like, you're the diversity solution of some problem that the board created or prior leadership created or something. You're pulling the org out of debt, or all of these secrets that you get handed. And, if you fail, it's because the person of color failed, right? Like there's all that is carried. But now we have this network that Dakota is now part of, that I would say has been so key to certainly try to help nudge others to get into these roles, but again, then to keep them. And I think one of the most powerful things I've seen, getting in philanthropic spaces is hard, but we try to bring each other along with us. We would talk about each other's work, that it wouldn't be just about our organization, but trying to uplift others along the way too, trying to ask, hey, can this person come into this space? Can they be on a panel? Folks getting on each other's boards, because sometimes the board's got to turn over. Sometimes the boards are really harmful, and we need our people to come in and try to believe in the vision of a new leader. So the creating space and relationships,
it's really important. Really important.
I think just add on to that, I think there's 2 points to your question. One, I think it's a lot easier to get a diverse leader than it is to keep them.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
that is so key, I think, to making sure that if you're trying to do this intentional shift, it's how are they going to be supported, right? And you wrote a dope article about how to support EDs of color. And there's so many things to identity. And you could hire one, but if that one is the one of 100 in a room, they're going to start to feel really, really isolated, right? And one of the quickest ways to burn out is to be the isolated voice in a room full of the majority, right? For whatever that is for you. And I've shifted my focus to not just trying to always make sure that doors are open for young leaders of color, but how, once they're in these rooms, do we get them to stay longer than 4 or 5 years, which I think is what we see in the youth sector is this burnout happens so quick. And these are young, brilliant minds that could literally help lead this movement for the next, few decades. But we lose young leaders so often because they're in the rooms and they're tokenized, right? Or they're a piece of decoration to a larger picture. As soon as you open the door, the door can close just as quickly as well too. So,
Yeah.
The thing is, it's like promoting a fish and not providing water. Taking the fish out of the water. Once you make the change and you make the commitment to be diverse, to be inclusive. Nelson Mandela had a saying, when in doubt, include. And so South Africa has this very cumbersome constitution that recognizes 11 languages because we don't want to leave anyone out. We have 6 colors in the flag because it's all the contending parties. And so I can go on. But the fact of the matter is, if you make the decision to be inclusive, you've got to not make the appointment change.
Right.
You've got to make the institutional and cultural change.
Right.
Otherwise, you will lose the person after a year.
Right.
But it's also, you've also got to manage and calculate the pain to yourself. So when I was in health and welfare, I come from a very conservative Muslim community that had no time for LGBTQI+ and so forth. But I needed people that I appointed to understand that I am doing this with some cost, and therefore there's a commitment that we have to each other beyond the appointment, that I'm ensuring that when we have people with disabilities, that we are going to make the structural shifts and not have toilets that we've got to improvise. It's got to be institutional.
Right.
It's got to be a worthy, not conflict-free, because you invite them into a conflict zone because they've been excluded because people have not known them, therefore have not understood them, therefore have not loved them, and therefore have not embraced them. And for you to get going along that whole continuum, you've got to start with putting the person into the face to be known,
Yes.
and then into the space to be understood, and then into the atmosphere in which to be loved and appreciated,
Yes.
and then into the atmosphere where the embrace follows naturally. If you can't do all of that,
Right.
you are tokenizing.
Right. And if you are in the majority, absolutely. Then if you are in the majority, don't leave it to the person who you're including or the group you're including to lead the change and make the change. We're not the ones with the problem. Okay? So just that's an important thing. There was one here and then there. Yes. Here. Yes.
you've all spoken with such conviction about the power and importance of purpose. And it's easy in this context to drink the Kool-Aid and think that everybody's connected to purpose. But in fact, leadership is deeply trammeled by disconnection from purpose. Leadership's contested, there's cynicism about leadership. And I just wonder, in each of your experience, how do you think about pivoting populations to purpose? What's the cultural change we need to make that underscores our collective responsibility to each other and a priority for the greater good? I just wonder, in your particular contexts and circumstances, what do you draw on in, as leaders yourselves, to perpetuate a purpose that's universal versus the odd few who stand up on, like you, and are extraordinary examples to us all?
Yes. Edith and Shahed, do you want to jump in?
I'll give it really in the context of our organization. First of all, we recognize that some people are joining this movement because they need a job and a livelihood, and we embrace that, and we recognize that, and we support that. But at the same time, we are also trying to ignite a movement around caregiving globally, and the two of us are incredibly passionate about that. And every single person in our organization has had a caregiving experience or a journey. And so I think what we try to do is to bring that out, hold that, recognize that, allow that to feed their whatever their own ambition of the work is, so that everyone is kind of is leading towards their own vision of what our goal is, and not necessarily what just ours is. Because everyone has their own ambition, and it might be bigger, or it might look different than the person sitting next to them, but holding that, embracing that, and recognizing that there's diversity in it, and again, just also realizing that not everyone needs to show up in the exact same way in order to show that,
and holding space for that and being accepting of that and not creating judgment around it.
Great. Final question here, because I know we're over time. Sorry.
Thank you. Almaz Negashan with the African Diaspora Network. So Nicole, actually this question is not to them, but it's really reflecting of what you said before this, I think before this last question. You mentioned about your own self of leadership, and I'm just going to say this because I don't think she will say this. I remember when she first came, because I know sometimes when you moderate, you're just trying to reflect other people's leadership, but I cannot leave the Skoll Award Forum without this incredible opportunity to thank you for what you did. I remember when she first came to lead Silicon Valley Community Foundation, we had a meeting of nonprofit organizations, and I'm not kidding you. At the time, this was 2019, the African Diaspora Network has less than $200,000 per year of donation. And I remember raising my hand and I said to her, what about this small organization? Who's going to do something for them? And I don't think you've ever forgotten that. And the reason I say this to you is, I think a year after, our organization received seed funding that propelled us to serve 26 leaders in 1 year. So I just want to give that back to you. And thank you for leading your value. Because I think, thank you. If we're speaking about leadership, it's also really showing what we mean in action. And I just want to applaud you for being where you are and for opening doors to the people that look like me that never had a door or a seat at Silicon Valley Community Foundation. I applaud you.
Thank you. Yeah, that might have been me. But with that, oh gosh, thank you. With that, please let us thank our amazing panelists.